Many of us have those stubborn pounds that seem impossible to lose, no matter how good we eat or how hard we work out. My solution is PlushCare. PlushCare is a leading telehealth provider with doctors who are there for you day and night to partner with you in your weight loss journey. They can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Plus, they accept most insurance plans. To get started, visit plushcare.com/weightloss. That's plushcare.com/weightloss.
Hello, everyone. Gabby here.
And I'm Steven Stuckey. I'm back. Hi.
Hi. Okay, so this week, Brenna is not here simply because we moved my brother down to Orlando. So we drove a U-Haul for 14 hours from Kentucky to Orlando. And we were supposed to record, but for editing's sake, it's a lot easier to edit like one track because Steven's voice has a preset. So to the person who says, whenever Brenna can be bothered to show up, this was not her fault.
Not to mention, we're literally doing this at what time?
It's like 8:30 p.m. on Sunday before the episode
right
goes
before
up.
It's supposed to go up, because this is how busy we've been.
Yeah, it's been really busy. But now that my brother's moved and everything is done, I think everything will slow down. So anyway, today's episode is an interesting one. Not to be dramatic, but the level of pain that I put myself through for this episode is bordering on concerning.
How much pain, Gabby? Please tell me in excruciating detail about how much pain we had to go through. First off, in finding the source material in the first place. Please elaborate.
Basically, it's an Ancient Aliens episode, and he watched it with me. So thanks for doing that.
You're welcome. Okay, you're welcome.
So a few weeks ago, Brenna sent me an article discussing whether or not people that have Rh-negative blood types were actually aliens, or more accurately, manipulated by aliens. And upon further research, I found that the huge source of this TikTok conspiracy was, of course, Season 11, Episode 10 of Ancient Aliens.
It feels like, you know how when talking about things for conspiracies that it can be surmised with the guy who's just going with the hand motions? Aliens. And I feel like when talking about the origin of conspiracies, right, you can almost always go back to Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
Like you could make a meme that is literally that same guy and just add the word ancient in front of it, and it can be applied to literally any kind of conspiracy that exists in modern day.
Yeah, because of course it is. So, of course, I watched the entire episode, and it dove into the conspiracy of prototypes and zoo theory. And guys, buckle up because it is about to get crazy. So initially, I wanted this episode to simply focus more closely on blood types because I have an Rh-negative blood type.
And you are an alien, yes. We know this.
You know that.
It's obvious.
But this episode turned into so much more because they had a ton of theories. Like, Steven, you were there.
I was there. And it's like, I'm going to say, this is my pet peeve. Even like time out on all this before we even move on to the whole RH, ancient alien, like whether or not they are aliens in the first place. The thing that bothered me on a fundamental storytelling level in the first place is that the entire thing felt like a bait and switch because they didn't even discuss the blood alien aspect until literally the last like 8 minutes of the entire hour-long program.
And it's so funny because if you go to TikTok and like you look up the prototypes or you talk about Rh-negative blood, you'll find like a bunch of videos that literally just took clips and played it. And then all of the comments are like, oh my gosh, I have Rh-negative blood. And that is so true. And I always felt different. And I'm like, oh my God.
It gives me, it's almost like conspiracy theory cringy Tumblr vibes. You know, the people who would be like, oh, I identify as a celestial body and all that here. But it's like people
Tumblr.
who are like, I'm an alien.
No,
I knew it.
I feel like that was a part of Tumblr, but I was on Tumblr. I still am on Tumblr. And like, nobody does that. Because
they always got cringed out. And somehow they moved from that to Ancient Aliens.
Maybe. So The discussion about blood types will come at the end, though, because I like to go through the episode in order of appearance in the show. And of course, that was like the last thing they discussed. So essentially, the basis for their episode stems from zoo theory and the Fermi paradox. So the Fermi paradox is an attempt at answering the question of whether or not there are aliens, and if there are, why we haven't encountered them. So it's named after Enrico Fermi, who was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who came up with the paradox. Essentially, the belief is that our solar system is comparatively young at about 4.5 billion years old. And this is compared to the 13.8 billion years of the rest of the universe, which means that interstellar travel should have already been achieved by some other civilization out there. So theoretically, based off of this information, Earth should have already been visited by aliens, which I think personally is a really main character theory. Like, Earth is obviously so important that aliens obviously should have cared enough to come visit us.
Okay, here's the thing. Think about it though, mathematically, for like a percentage of celestial bodies, and like what is the percentage of things that would arguably be habitable. Now, obviously, I'm saying habitable by human standards for this, like, considering life, but really life only exists as we know it within certain parameters. And that is a very, 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 very small percentage of like possible bodies.
Well, the thing is, they've been using telescopes and they've been finding potentially, and again, potentially habitable planets within a reasonable distance from the suns in their systems that may be perfect for life. But as we get into later, even if life were to evolve on a planet, that doesn't mean that it would be able to be maintained. Because, yeah, there's strict restrictions towards what would support life, but also, let's say we were, like, some aliens out there were evolved past, detect to travel. Who's to say they didn't already destroy themselves?
Yeah. And then like there's the whole Mass Effect, like Reaper theory, where it's like every 50,000 years, something comes along and just wipes it.
Yeah. So, I don't know why aliens haven't shown up, but I love how we're so main character about it. Like, they should have been curious. Just because we're curious doesn't mean other planets would be curious, because there's other theories that are basically like, okay, so for X amount of planets out there, if there's even one civilization that wants to wipe everyone out, maybe based off of that, it would like keep others from venturing too far out there to be detected.
Yeah.
Like, that is also a theory. That was a loose definition of the theory, but
for as many infinite possibilities as there are in the universe, there are an infinite number of possibilities of this. We literally have no way of knowing.
Exactly. But anyway, from the belief that we should have already encountered aliens, though, comes the zoo theory to explain why we haven't. So the zoo hypothesis was proposed by John Allen Ball in 1973, and essentially it says that aliens are avoiding all interactions with us deliberately because Earth is some sort of zoo for them. So think of the way we don't contact certain tribes that have been isolated, or of the way in many different space travel shows there's something along the lines of a prime directive.
Like what we would see in Star Trek.
Yeah, the prime directive was the command that they couldn't interfere with the developments of other civilizations or interfere with the development of more primitive civilizations, even if they think that they have the ability to make life better, etc. So they typically have to wait until a civilization becomes advanced enough before they make contact at all. So this theory isn't provable and it's not even testable, but it is a really creepy thought. Like, aliens are just watching us, kind of like breeding us, manipulating us to turn into whatever they want. So as the episode of Ancient Aliens states, they're actually manipulating us like breeding stock in order to create a more advanced species of humanoid. But we'll get into that once we dive, further into the episode.
That's such a specific action too, though. Like, why?
I don't know. But when you think about it and you just sit there thinking about aliens, they got creative with their little daydream thoughts, I think. So anyway, after Fermi died, there were other physicists such as Michael Hart that continued with other theories or similar theories. So many physicists over the years have challenged the Fermi paradox with other reasons as to why we haven't yet encountered alien life. Hart himself gave possible reasons for which, and these are 1, aliens never came here because of a physical difficulty that makes space travel infeasible, which could be related to astronomy, biology, or engineering.
Oh, it's clearly Warhammer 40K. It's the warp. There's demonic entities that are stopping it.
Or 2, aliens simply chose never to visit us. Or 3, advanced civilizations beyond Earth arose too recently for aliens to reach us. And 4, aliens have visited Earth in the past, but we haven't observed them. So while we have been able to gather evidence of potentially habitable planets in the universe, we still haven't come across proof of intelligent life. Another theory for this is simply that life is rare in the universe because it is difficult to maintain habitable environments, or some theorists have suggested that civilizations may actually extinguish themselves by accident after they gain technology.
I mean, to be fair, humans could do that even now.
Right?
You don't really know.
For example, Earth itself has the threat of nuclear weapons or anthropogenic climate change. So really, there are countless theories as to why we haven't seen aliens.
There's also the whole thing for like biological warfare and accidentally creating a virus or a bacteria that is capable of wiping things out. I mean, the Japanese tried to do this in World War II, basically. Who knows what you could potentially do 100 or 200 years from now?
Exactly. And so, we don't necessarily have to just lean into zoo theory as the only potential reason. You know what I'm saying? So honestly, my next episode might end up being, where are the aliens? And we'll just dive into why we maybe haven't seen them yet, or if they even exist.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
When Johann Rall received the letter on Christmas Day 1776, he put it away to read later. Maybe he thought it was a season's greeting and wanted to save it for the fireside. But what it actually was a warning, delivered to the Hessian colonel, letting him know that General George Washington was crossing the Delaware and would soon attack his forces. The next day, when Rall lost the Battle of Trenton and died from 2 colonial Boxing Day musket balls, the letter was found, unopened, in his vest pocket. As someone with 15,000 unread emails in his inbox, I feel like there's a lesson there. Oh well, this is The Constant, a history of getting things wrong. I'm Mark Chrysler. Every episode, we look at the bad ideas, mistakes, and accidents that misshaped our world. Find us at constantpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
So let's get into the episode now that we've laid the foundation. The episode starts with discussions of a professor that studied countless alien abductions, and he believes that aliens are potentially using planet Earth as a laboratory. They believe that aliens are trying to modify human DNA to create a specific species or creature that they want, and they use all previous types of hominins throughout the episode as proof of this theory.
Like all the stuff with, like Neanderthals, Denisovans, etc., like all of the ancient humans, so to speak, or like the proto-humans.
Exactly. So the first example in the episode was the discovery of Homo naledi by spelunkers. Homo naledi, they were similar to humans, but are distinctly different. They said that this organism may have been the first type of hominid from Africa, but then they followed it up with the fact that the cave where they were found was way too new for that to be the case. And then the episode experts discuss how the Homo naledi were very primitive, but at the same time somehow very advanced. A conclusion that they came to from them possibly having funeral rites, aka they seem to be buried in a cave.
Okay, there was a theme, and I know this exactly. You're putting it like word for what it is that they're saying in this, and this is the part that really bothers me throughout all of this. The amount of times, and I do this when talking about history as well, when they say possibly, probably, they perhaps thought, like reading into people's minds and abilities and intentions.
But the thing is that they would also lead it up with, it definitely appears to be.
It most certainly is possibly that.
So that was really confusing because they would lead it up with like a definitive yes.
A definitive absolute.
And then end with a potentially.
It is absolutely maybe this way.
Yeah. So it was a little bit deceptive, I think, in that presentation. But I have a photo of Homo naledi attached just for you guys to see. So here's some info on them. Homo naledi were discovered in the Rising Star Cave in South Africa in 2013. Over several months, over 1,550 specimens from about 15 Homo naledi individuals were found, and the remains were dated as being between 335,000 and 236,000 years. The species, they had hands, feet, and wrists that were very similar to modern humans, but the upper body and brain size, they more closely resembled a pre-human ancestor, the Australopithecus afarensis, which was a small-brained early hominin species that was able to walk upright. So the discussion of Homo naledi potentially burying their dead, this changed the way we would think of them. Because from a simple pre-human species to a species capable of more complex thought, which was capable of creating funeral rites, like having that proof completely changed our view. Well, it could completely change our view. So why do we think they buried their dead? Some experts believe that someone had to have carried the bodies and intentionally placed them deep into the caves. Also, some people claim that some of the bodies were even buried in shallow graves. In addition, there are arguments that the markings on the wall of the cave may have shown that early humans were marking the cave walls. So the argument that this species did bury their dead is usually harder to prove because it's harder to show this type of burial practice in the fossil record due to something called funerary caching. And this is where bodies are found in natural holes or caves, which we see quite a lot of in history with both hominin and animal bodies being found in caves.
Yeah, like if you find a bear, like a family of dead bears, back in a cave, you're not going to assume, oh man, a bunch of bears dragged that body in there and then left it like they buried it there. So, no, it's a bear. It died in a cave.
So due to that, it is really hard to prove funeral rites typically. So if you look past the possibility of funerary caching, an actual burial of a body would add more complex cultural implications to Homo naledi behavior and other types of hominin behavior.
Also, I have to ask in the first place, because we're talking about 300, 400, 300 something thousand years ago, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so over that time, is there not a possibility of, even if something was not buried, that sediment specifically would have gone over it?
Right, and that's where you'll see as we go on, like just literally a few more sentences, they show why they think it would be buried. So according to the Natural History Museum UK, one recovered skeleton was found in a crouched position holding a stone tool in a depression that had clear-cut lines around its edge, which indicated that a hole may have been dug and refilled. And so I've included a picture of what that may have looked like, and you can kind of see why they would think it was dug up. But again, we wouldn't know for sure, Like
if it's crouched, it could actually straight up be in the classic fetal position.
So there's just a lot of maybes. So either way, this episode of Ancient Aliens, it really leaned into the fact that the Homo naledi may have been more culturally advanced based off of potential funerary rites than, we would expect of an ancient ancestor, which was really important to the argument that they started off with. Like the aliens started off with very simple iterations of humans and then manipulated them constantly until they got modern humans. So the episode continued past this with one of the quote-unquote experts saying, it's like Lord of the Rings, where all of these different humanoid species are together.
Oh my God,
They have different
line.
heights, different skin color, different hair, and even different brains. Some are more animal-like and some are more human-like. I slightly reworded that, but you get the gist,
Yeah, I get the gist. And just the way that it's phrased in the first place is just it's so weird.
Yeah. And then they went on to discussing Darwin's theory of evolution, saying that if his theory is correct, they should see a slow, steady progression of these early humanoids to modern humans. But the expert says, quote, we are not seeing that. So what they were doing is implying that the change from early humanoids to modern humans had to happen with additional manipulation, which is such a deceitful way to present this information because we do see a natural progression. We also see interbreeding between species later on that we have been able to show genetically. But anyway, we'll get into that later. But the way they presented this, like, oh yeah, they were all like super different everywhere and no one ever at all boinked.
Yeah, no, literally, because they're talking about people being completely
evolved.
isolated and yet somehow evolving in this way that they shouldn't have been able to do. Like, how the hell do you know that? How do you know that they wouldn't have been able to? Like,
Of course, we miss a lot of stuff in like the fossil record as well. So
yeah,
we don't
it's an
have
incomplete
a full
picture.
Yeah.
It is. But it's the same kind of thing. I would make an argument that it's almost the same as when you would have those racist arguments where people would say, oh, well, they clearly couldn't have done this. It must have been aliens. And it's like, you literally do not know what they were like. This is an incomplete picture. How do you know that they shouldn't be that advanced if they were capable? Maybe it's early signs, but they have literally nothing else that's developed.
Also, finding new quote unquote like humanoid, like hominin remains is relatively new because before people just assumed they were people. So a lot of those fossils would have gotten lost. Plus, a lot of the discoveries of new ones are really recent in comparison. So,
like literally 2013 was one of these.
Exactly. So, just saying that, oh yeah, they were planted and manipulated and they didn't evolve naturally it's a really strange claim to make.
It feels very disingenuous. So much of this feels so disingenuous, which I know we're talking ancient aliens, but
I know. So at that point, I wanted to throw my remote at the TV, but nevertheless, I persisted.
Hey y'all, spooky season is here. And if you're looking for a show to whet your appetite for a little haunted history, then I'd like to invite you to check out Southern Gothic, a chart-topping history podcast that explores some of the most infamous legends, folklore, ghost stories, and hauntings of the American South. We've covered all sorts of stuff from the Bell Witch of Tennessee to the disappearance of the Confederate submarine, the H.L. Hunley. Not to mention our deep dives into the local lore of some of America's oldest and most haunted cities, like New Orleans, Charleston, and St. Augustine. So, if you're ready for a little good old-fashioned Halloween storytelling with a commitment to quality historical research, then be sure to check out Southern Gothic today. It's available now on all your favorite podcast apps.
So this is History Uncovered, and I'm Kalina.
And I'm Austin. We are the co-hosts of the show.
History Uncovered is a podcast presented by All That's Interesting, where we both are writers. We cover all sorts of topics: true crime, unsolved mysteries, history, folklore, the paranormal, you name it.
We've been doing this now for more than 100 episodes, covering a wide range of topics, and probably something that's bound to be interesting for everyone out there.
Absolutely. And in addition to our normal episodes, we also do a history happy hour about the recent news in the world of history and archaeology, which we cover daily on the site, as well as important historical anniversaries.
We also have done some special series. We've done one on the Titanic, doing one on Jack the Ripper, done one about some famous UFO sightings. So if all of that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, and you like having a good time, learning new things, and maybe laughing or just groaning at some bad puns, check out History Uncovered everywhere you get your podcasts.
For you all. So the episode talked about the sudden emergence of early humans who were, quote, actually quite evolved, which is a problem because he used the word suddenly, just because we couldn't find other evidence of their existence previously. So, of course, that naturally means they spawned out of an alien lab.
Like, seriously, what the absolute hell?
I'm not trying to be condescending. However, there are so many other possible explanations, especially if you guys listened to my earlier episode on Neanderthals, where we went over the various types of early human-like organisms.
Even when talking about things like going back into dinosaurs, we don't have every single example of dinosaurs because it took very specific things to happen in order to get fossils, which means that of like 99.99% of what was there, we're not going to have that. We're only going to have small recollections of it. So there's only certain things left over that we'll be able to identify in the first place. So saying, oh no, it suddenly appeared, we literally don't have any evidence of that.
So, side note, actual quote from this episode that made me chuckle, quote, "The scientific community explains everything away by natural selection and coincidence," end quote.
You mean most of like life as we know it?
So they then chalked up the evolution of humans to possibly being controlled by aliens, because of course they do. And to find evidence of this, they decided to look at the early artwork and writings. So to back up their claims, they said that there are notions from ancient stories that our ancestors that were the earliest example of civilization were not the first attempts. And yeah, in legend, we had the Greek idea of the 4 ages of man, and these were known as the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. And all of these ages represented a different time and civilization when gods walked among humans. This is a common theme in a lot of creation myths as well. So going off of stories like this, it's easy to believe that our early ancestors were aware of a possible society that came before and failed and then was replaced by another entirely. Maybe from witnessing it or from seeing the aftermath of it, you know?
No, I totally get that. It's one of the things, like, I personally think that one of the reasons why dragons are such a common myth literally all over the world is because people found, fossils of stuff. And thought like, oh, hey, there was a gigantic beast that was here at some point. And so stories got created as a result of that.
Yeah. So this specific episode of Ancient Aliens, it referenced Sumerian texts from the Anki legends that had 6 attempts to create a proper human. They also referenced the Maya books that said that there were 3 attempts. So going off of this, obviously, it was aliens.
Of course. Yes.
But just kidding.
Why not?
Maybe different cultures all had the same idea because as humans, we at our core chase the idea of perfection and we want a definitive answer as to why we are sentient beings with higher intelligence versus, the others, the other life that exists around us.
Why are we not goats, Gabby?
But this episode...
Why are we not goats? I mean, I kind of am a goat. I will eat just about anything.
You would. But this episode, it really focused on the fact that the ideas of potential gods that shaped and created humans were just aliens. And I can honestly see where that could be a reasonable explanation, I guess. But again, all creation myths, legends, and theories are just ideas with no way to prove them. And with so many of them being so similar, it makes sense that people would think that obviously they all saw the same things and tried to explain them, which may have led to similar stories all coming out of the same regions. Or because humans are trying to understand where they came from and where everything came from, they all kind of took a similar path, a similar reasoning.
Yeah, I could get that. I mean, here's the thing. There's a logic behind some of this stuff,
But
there's a logic.
Well, with going back to similar stories all coming out of the same regions because they all saw the same things, the biblical flood, many different cultures had the story of the Great Flood. Honestly, a podcast on flood myths and stories would be really fun because there's so many, with some being very similar to Noah's flood and others being so very different. But because many different cultures on Earth had flood myths, doesn't mean that every culture saw aliens perform a great flood.
Ooh, there's also the thing that a whole bunch of the civilizations literally started next to flood plains and they were dependent upon them.
So at some point, they all experienced a great flood. That's just what it means. Anyway, one of the experts on the show so graciously explained that different cultures around the world have similar stories of creation because, quote, there's a very good chance that early humans were possibly genetically manipulated by advanced extraterrestrials trying to create and formulate the ultimate human.
I'm sorry,
unquote.
Gabby. Can you please go back and please, for the sake of this, just reread the phrasing about the possibilities and definitely's of this?
So there's a very good chance that early humans were possibly genetically manipulated by advanced extraterrestrials trying to create and formulate the ultimate human.
Very good chance.
Unquote.
That possibly... Can we quantify this very good chance?
So we gotta believe him, guys. So this is where they really start to lean into the idea that the planet itself is an experimental lab for aliens that utilize many different models, aka previous humanoid organisms, that were part of tests that they were trying to get to modern Homo sapiens. And the episode asked the question of whether this is still ongoing today in order to continuously improve the human population. Now, I don't want to completely write this off at the beginning of the episode. I want to give it a shot. So let's see what they say. The episode took us to Flores Island in Indonesia around 2003, when the skull of what was believed to be a human child was found underground. But after more work, they realized that it was the skull of a fully grown humanoid that was not very large, and they named this one Homo floresiensis. So, I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in my previous episode. So this particular species were fondly called the hobbits because they were small, and they also had really small brains.
Weren't they, I think I remember the episode, they're supposed to be like literally 3 feet tall?
I'm not sure the exact height. but they utilized stone tools that were similar to what modern humans use. They also hunted small elephants and large rodents, and they may have used fire. So the episode really focused on how this Floresiensis got to the island where they were found. And the theories presented in the episode being they used boats or they were planted there by aliens.
Because why not? You know, it's either a boat or it's an alien. Hey, Gabby, either one is a ship.
Well,
technically speaking, if you said that they got there by ship, you would be right either way.
Okay, so what do we know about Homo floresiensis? Well, we know that it's its own distinct human species. When the species was discovered, the group that found them proposed that some individuals from the Homo erectus species traveled from Java to Flores. And when they got to Flores, they ended up shrinking down. So this theory was based on the idea of insular dwarfism, which is a phenomena where larger organisms that end up isolated on islands, they end up evolving to be smaller due to the fact that they don't have large predators and they do have limited resources. So to all of the folks who are like, what do I do on a deserted island? Well, your descendants will probably just be some tiny little guys.
Just some silly tiny little guys, you know, unless of course you don't have anyone to breed with, in which case.
Ooh, sorry.
Sorry about your luck.
Maidenless on a deserted island of all things.
Maidenless on a deserted island.
So, anyway, the idea that Floresiensis came from Homo erectus was largely disregarded due to their features as well as cladistic analysis. Floresiensis exhibited more Australopithecine-like features, showing that they more than likely came from a more ancient ancestor than Homo erectus. But their remains have only ever been found on the Flores Islands. And while we don't know when Floresiensis evolved, we do know that there is evidence that it did have an ancestor that lived on Flores for hundreds of thousands of years. Stone tools and teeth have been found at other parts of Flores, giving proof that either Homo floresiensis or their ancestor was present at least 700,000 years ago.
That's a big time here, right? Especially considering the previous jump was like 330,000.
And interestingly enough, they went extinct about 50,000 years ago, which is right around the time that we have the earliest evidence of Homo sapiens appearing on Flores, which they did around 46,000 years ago. However, we don't know what happened to them. We just know that Homo floresiensis went extinct around the same time as other humanoid species that went extinct as modern humans started spreading around the world. Weird coinky-dink. So as to how they got to the remote island, well, that's really important to their theory. So let's see. They aren't the only species that have been found on a small isolated island. Homo luzonensis is another species that was found in the Philippines. And this one was dated to have existed at around the same time as Floresiensis. However, while they have common characteristics, they are distinctly different, and they're two separate species. It is widely theorized that these species may have gotten to these islands through potential accidental rafting on mats of vegetation after catastrophic events like volcanoes or maybe even earthquakes or tsunamis. So, for example of this, we have catastrophic tsunamis where some people survived on floating debris for over a week, traveling like huge distances. Or maybe it was intentional travel. In theory, if they were advanced enough to utilize stone tools and hunt, they may have had like primitive rafts, you know?
I mean, if you hunt and it's like if you have even the most early form of a spear or anything like that, you're using lashing, which lashing rope. You have something, literally just fiber that you can kind of twist together.
If they made some primitive rafts and they were able to get there in specific conditions, but maybe the rafts got destroyed and they weren't able to leave, who knows? We do know that other animals reach Flores by swimming or floating. So really, who's to say what occurred? But I really, really don't think they got there because aliens wanted isolated groups of hominin species to use as lab rats. But maybe that's just me, you know? It would be way easier to just say aliens and call it a day. Moving on, though, the episode then went into the Denisovans. Again, we mentioned them in an earlier episode, but here's a small refresher. So the Denisovans, they were the first ancient hominins that were identified by genes only, and not by fossil classification. They were discovered in Russia in the Denisova caves, and last time we spoke of ancient humans being found in caves, I got a bunch of comments saying, that's sus, they're always found in caves. Well, guys, caves probably were better at protecting the remains than those who died out in the open.
Not to
Also-
mention for anyone that would have needed any kind of protection. Like, you don't have the advanced architectural skills to be able to construct something. Even as mud bricks literally do not exist.
Yeah,
they don't know
so-
how to construct those.
They probably took shelter in the caves and then they died there versus dying out in the open, and being eaten or something.
Literally.
So honestly, they may have been hiding from harsher climate conditions when they died. There are a lot of possible explanations for why they would be found in caves. But anyway, back to Denisovans. They were related to the Neanderthals as they interbred, although the two groups split around 400 to 500,000 years ago. And while there are theories that they were around up until 15,000 years ago, we know for sure they were around at least 30,000 years ago. So the experts in the show, they went on to say, quote, "It's particularly fascinating when we look at the geographical distribution of the early humans. They're in different parts of the world. But we know from genetic information that a lot of the early humanoid species, they were getting freaky with one another." So the way the episode presented this as though they were all supposed to be completely isolated goes against the widely accepted theories.
Please give us more detail on this shaboinking, if you will, to use the technical term.
But they leaned really hard into the concept that aliens use different zones on Earth for different experiments. For example, islands and tops of mountains, which brought up the idea of the zoo hypothesis in this episode. And I did have issue with this and the way it was presented because the way they showed it made it seem a lot more sinister than it was, that all of these species were spread out, especially since we have evidence that suggests that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans all share a common ancestor with Homo heidelbergensis. In addition, these three species met and interbred, like they did bone. We have their genetic material inherited. For example, researchers found in 2014 the ethnic Sherpas likely inherited a gene variant from Denisovans known as EPAS1. That makes it easier for them to breathe at high altitudes. So no, we weren't all kept in little cages, completely unable to meet one another, and having just been plopped down in random areas with no shared ancestors. What they're saying there is genuinely just sensationalized points to make people spread this information like wildfire, which is what happened because there's so many conspiracy theories that start with ancient aliens or some random guy on TikTok. Stop doing that. Stop listening to them. Please. Go watch Mini Minute Man. He's debunking this one guy who never shuts the fuck up. And please, we need more of that. We need more debunking the people who just spread shit. I'm just saying. So then the episode really ramped up. Remember how I said Neanderthals and humans procreated? Well, in this episode of Ancient Aliens, they decided to blame the demise of all other humanoid creatures on this, due to the fact that all of the early hominids were supposed to remain geologically separate due to our alien overlords. So because they boinked, they got axed.
Do you remember? Okay, for anyone who hasn't seen this, I sort of, if you go back and you watch any scene from this show, go and watch this specific one, because I swear to God, it looks like something out of a early 2000s sci-fi the Sci-Fi Channel where they'd have the really bad graphics TV show with this. And it is literally showing these spaceships going in, blowing up random computer generated forests with screaming human voices in the background to show oh yeah, the aliens definitely moved in with alien stealth bombers and completely wiped them out.
Yeah. But due to the fact that the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred, the experts hypothesize that it led to the Neanderthal strain having to be terminated or removed from the planet. And guys, that explanation completely voids my episode on the extinction of Neanderthals because obviously it was alien. And they back this idea up by showing how in many cultures and religions, the wrath of God or the gods that eradicated groups of humans or caused harm could be examples of extraterrestrial interventions that were working to keep all the early humanoids separate from one another. So basically, the Neanderthals and Denisovans were smited by the gods for getting freaky with it. I will say everything but breeding.
Listen, hey, I also think that sounds very inaccurate, because if there's anything that the creation myths, or a lot of the ancient societies with their gods did, they boinked a lot, so it doesn't make sense. I mean, come on, just look at Zeus.
Right? So this episode then moved into the study from 1998 that tried to trace the genetic lineage of Native Americans back to the Bering Strait. What they found is that around 97% of Native Americans belong to one of four major founding mitochondrial DNA lineages. They're named haplogroups A to D. However, there was a fifth proposed lineage that is also found in modern European populations. This is known as the X lineage, which is a group that may have been distantly related to the European X lineage, even though they are distinctly different. Of course, the show chalked that up to aliens because the X gene was, quote, related to the giants. So we aren't going to open the can of worms that is giants at this point in time. That's an episode for later because, believe in them or not, they're a very controversial part of science and history. But stay tuned for an episode on giants in the near future. But this episode essentially chalked up giants to, can you guess it? You can. Aliens. It was aliens, guys.
Okay, it can't even... See, that's the thing that inherently bothers me, though, because it can't even interpret like, oh, yes, maybe there was just some other biological evolution or whatever. Like, no, clearly this was also aliens, if anything.
But...
Hello, everyone. Takuya here.
And I'm Gabby.
And we are the hosts of History of Everything, a podcast which you can probably guess by the name is, well, I mean, it's about everything. Do you want to know why people thought potatoes were evil and would give you syphilis? Are you curious about all the stories of the terrible and stupid ways that people have kicked the bucket over the years? Do you want to hear tales about all of the different badasses of history and the lives that they had brought to life? Well, if so, then look no further. History of Everything is just the right podcast for you. It's available on Spotify, Pandora, and anywhere else that you get your podcast from. Join us for some fun and just see how weird and wacky history can be.
Serial killers, strange disappearances, unexplained mysteries, terrible disasters. I'm Nate Hale, and in my show, The Conspirators, I'm here to tell you all the stories from history your teacher never told you about. Hear the real story behind the Bermuda Triangle, or about the history of people drinking blood to stay young, or about the serial killer operating in Nazi-occupied Paris, or what dark secret lurked within the walls of a Scottish castle. In my show, The Conspirators, I take you on a journey through some of the darkest corners of history, where you'll hear about the folklore, myths, and misconceptions behind some of the darkest events that ever happened. Listen to The Conspirators on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction.
Now for the part of the episode that initially sent me down this rabbit hole in the first place, the Rh-negative conspiracy. So the episode spoke of the Basque people that occupy the Pyrenees mountain range, and these people have the highest concentration of Rh-negative blood types in the world. For instance, in the US, about 85% of the population has Rh-positive blood, with only 15% having Rh-negative blood. And if you don't know what this means, essentially people who have Rh-positive have antigens on their red blood cells. And people who are Rh-negative, they don't have these antigens. And we actually produce antibodies that attack these Rh antigens. So related fun fact about me, I have the rarest blood type of the 8 main blood types, coming in at an AB negative, which caused a great deal of trouble for us because Steve has a positive blood type and I have a negative one. And in reproduction, positive and negative Rh really don't vibe. And that's what this episode of Ancient Aliens really dug into about the blood types.
That was a really rough time. For those of you who aren't getting from this here, it can lead to a lot of miscarriages and trouble, to say the least. It's not a fun experience.
Yeah. We get into that later on in this episode, like towards the end. So they brought up the really interesting topic of premarital blood tests that I had never heard of. But it turned out, up until around the mid-1980s, and even later in some states in the US, a blood test was legally required before a marriage license could be issued. I'm not even joking. So the episode claims that it was due to finding, Rh factor, but it was also to track venereal diseases and other genetic conditions. But I did look into it, and a lot of people said, yeah, it was because they didn't have Rogam, because Rogam is the shot essentially that they give.
And to suppress it.
Yeah, so they give Rh-negative moms a shot that typically helps them not create
antibodies. It literally suppresses the antibodies.
So it doesn't attack the fetus. And you have to get it, like after miscarriages or after giving birth, like at certain different points in your pregnancy, you also have to get it. I got it a ton. They give it to you in your butt and you're just like, ow. But it works. But before they had Rogam, they just didn't let people with positive and negative blood types, I guess, get married, according to what I was able to find. So the episode claims that it was to track just Rh factor, but it was also for venereal diseases. If you had one, you had to get it treated before they would issue your marriage license. I wasn't able to find 100% proof that was only used for Rh or anything like that, but I'd assume it was before the development of RhoGAM. So the episode went on to say that Rh negative have lower than normal blood pressure, lower than normal pulse, and sometimes an extra vertebrae in the back. But these claims are not widely or universally accepted. When it comes to Rh, though, Rh negative is rare. It is rare partially because of how it is inherited. So it is a recessive trait, which a recessive trait is only visible when you inherit it from both parents. So for me to be Rh negative, that means both of my parents were like carrying it, Does that make sense? In contrast, a dominant trait shows up even if you only inherit it from one parent. So basically what that would look like is if two people with positive blood types have a kid, they'll have a kid with a positive blood type. If one positive and one negative, if you have one positive and one negative, you're going to be like positive. If you have negative and negative, you're going to have a negative blood type. You know what I mean? So I have to have both.
Yes.
Be negative for me to have a negative blood type.
Correct. Like it has to be absolute. And even now, the thing with our daughter is, oh wait, hold on. What was she?
Positive.
Oh yeah, she's positive. But that means that between the two of us, that means she's the middle. That means she's positive negative. So if she is with someone who is also positive negative or has an Rh negative blood type, then that increases the likelihood of producing negative children. Or it's like a 50-50 chance that that's going to happen. Because
both my parents would have had to be positive negative. You know what I mean?
In order
for me to be negative.
Yes.
And you're probably just positive.
Yeah.
So, according to the tech.org, another reason why Rh negative blood type might be rare is due to hemolytic disease of the newborn, which is where Rh negative moms, like me, may have complications carrying a baby from a partner with Rh positive blood. So in modern times, we prevent this with RhoGAM. But before this, medicine was widely available. Babies, they could die from the condition. This would mean that Rh negative mothers might not have had as many healthy babies or passed down their negative gene to they wouldn't have had the babies to pass down their genes too. And that could have caused Rh negative to be more rare. However, the rarity may also be simply due to random chance and nothing else, as the article pointed out. So, shit happens occasionally just because. However, ancient aliens, they chalk that up to the blood type evolving from an entirely different species, framing it as though the mother's body is rejecting the baby, but in all reality, it's just a matter of different DNA. Needless to say, I always knew I was better than you human plebs, But, wow, it's just shocking
Gabby.
to hear it said out loud, for realsies, that I'm so cool and so much cooler than everyone else. Just kidding. Anyway, wouldn't it be cool, though, if I were part of, an alien family? They're just chilling in space watching me go, being cool. Being amazing, my little Rh negative self.
Anyway. I'm sorry. The whole thing where it talks about the hybrids that are being created, and it shows oh yes, multiple people who were kidnapped by aliens, and it would talk about going into a lab and seeing human alien hybrids in there, and I'm just what the frick, man? So
the episode was right when it discussed the fact that we aren't sure where Rh negative blood comes from, though. According to IFL Science article, Rh negative blood is really rare. Around 15% of Caucasians are negative, while only 8% of Black people and only 1% of Asians are. But this doesn't mean that it originated from aliens. There are many, many genes that have naturally mutated. So eye color is one of these. Originally, we all had brown eyes, and then 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, some people stopped having the ability to produce the melanin necessary for brown eyes. And so other colors like blue, green, and hazel, they just happen simply because there isn't enough melanin to produce, not enough melanin is produced to make brown eyes. So that's why you have gray eyes, Steve. Not enough melanin. Sorry. But as this episode of Ancient Aliens ended, they left us with the thought that young children are growing up faster, they're smarter, and they're more mature. And because of this, they're probably being manipulated by aliens, which I don't think that's the case. I mean, we're just introducing new tech to our children, and all of the information anyone could ever need is at their fingertips, literally. For instance, my daughter has been watching Korean shows since she was 2, and now she understands Korean. While I could say that it's aliens, I know for a fact it's actually just YouTube.
But what if, and hear me out on this, what if the Koreans are aliens?
Oh my God. Anyway, guys, while it's a nice thought that aliens are manipulating us to make us better suited for our return to the stars, I just think it's a lot of effort on their part just for us to get up to space and start littering. I mean, we're going to do what we do, and it's littering. I don't think the aliens want this. So this episode was really trying to sell the fact that we're being replaced by a brand new, more advanced type of human. And technically, due to evolution, we are.
Yeah, but you also heard the thing where it's like in terms of, how IQ grows every generation or something. And it's the first time now that
Gen Alpha.
it's
So
Gen
Joya's
Alpha
generation.
that it's actually lower.
But, so Gen Alpha, what happened to Gen Alpha? COVID.
Yeah.
At their formative years in school, the very important years where they should have been learning and going to school, they were
COVID as
stuck
well
at
as
home.
an over-reliance on technology without actual hands-on education. And I mean,
So-
like, literally parents who are like, I don't know what to do. Quick, stick them in front of the iPad or whatever.
So, yeah, it's going to happen. And I think they can come back from that. I'm really rooting for them. But Joya's super smart. So she's definitely going to help boost Gen Alpha, their IQ, a little bit.
That's the hope. Our daughter will be, it sounds so arrogant
the
to say,
alien.
but no, our daughter is going to be the one that saves idiocracy.
I don't know about save.
She's the one that is going to be working on the anti-balding research while everyone else is putting Gatorade on their crops.
I feel like she might also do the Gatorade thing, but it's a balance, babe.
She'd do that as an experiment, but she'd first give it to ants.
It's like she's really smart about like animals and stuff, but then also sometimes she's the Gatorade on the crops too. It's balance, baby. You got to do both. So anyway, guys, that is the episode. It was a wild ride. I would say go watch this episode of Ancient Aliens, but really don't put yourself through that. It's not worth it. But it is on Amazon.
I would also never advise someone to specifically go and watch something that in any way, shape, or form gives money to them to continue it.
Well, it's
personally.
ads though. You have to watch ads. So
I know.
That's more reason to not watch it, y'all. But let me know what you think. Are aliens manipulating us to create the perfect human species? And if so, what do they get out of this? Are we just some random alien science fair project? Which would be so funny because he's probably watching us fuck shit up. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
I am the baking soda volcano of the galaxy. Hear ye, hear ye. I'm about to explode.
And no matter what we do, nothing matters because we have been manipulated for what seems like hundreds of thousands of years, but really it's just one alien week? ? I love Ancient Aliens just for the wild plots that they cover and try to sell to people as real who don't know any better. And guess what? People buy it and it kills me. It kills me, y'all. It kills me.
It's like every time I watch anything with a Netflix history, like docudrama or any of that stuff, and it brings me such pain on a fundamental level.
Oh my God. Ancient Aliens to me is like Cleopatra
for where they
to
misrepresent
Netflix's
science for
Cleopatra.
misrepresenting how something would be. Yeah.
So thank you guys for listening. Just let me know what you want to hear next and stay mysterious. Bye, guys.
Bye.